I was 38 years old, icing my knees after a 12-hour shift on a commercial roof, when I logged into my wife's fertility portal to pay a $400 lab fee and found the digital signature of the man who actually fathered the child she was carrying. I just kept staring at the cursor blinking on the harsh white screen. The gel ice pack was sliding down my right kneecap, dripping condensation onto the cheap, scuffed linoleum floor of our kitchen, but I couldn't command my hands to move. My jaw locked so incredibly tight that my back teeth ground together, sending this high-pitched, metallic ringing noise straight through my ears. The document was right there, loaded in high definition. Directed donor consent form. It sat right beneath a VIP genetic screening profile. And the signature at the bottom of the page wasn't mine, and it wasn't some anonymous string of medical serial numbers. It was Julian's. Her wealthy, corporate, executive suite ex-fiancé. 6 years. 6 years of marriage, man. 6 years of me hauling 100-pound bundles of asphalt shingles up a 2-story aluminum ladder in the blistering July heat, thinking I was building a solid foundation for us. I liquidated my entire 401k for this. Every single penny I had saved since I was 22. I took every brutal weekend side job I could find, patching flat roofs in the freezing rain, breathing in toxic sealant fumes, just to fund 3 separate, agonizingly expensive rounds of IVF. I did it because she would sit on the edge of our bed, look at me with those big, teary eyes, and tell me how desperately she wanted our family. My family. But sitting there at the kitchen island, staring at Julian's perfectly looped, arrogant signature, the sweat drying cold and sticky on the back of my neck, the illusion just vanished. I realized I wasn't a husband. I was a workhorse. I was nothing but a bank account with a pulse, brought in to finance the premium genetics she actually wanted. I rubbed my calloused thumb over the laptop's trackpad. My hands were permanently stained with black roofing tar that never completely washes out, no matter how hard you scrub your skin with pumice soap and hot water. It takes days to wear off. Just like this lie. She had engineered the whole damn thing from the ground up. The clinic paperwork, the scheduling, the private consultations. She needed Julian's pristine, country club bloodline. But she knew damn well Julian wasn't going to stick around to change diapers at 3 a.m. or pay a 30-year mortgage. He didn't have the grit for it. He didn't have the stomach for real life. She needed my blue-collar stability, my blind loyalty, for the heavy lifting. I could feel the blood rushing in my ears, pumping hot and thick against my eardrums. My chest got incredibly tight, like someone had strapped a heavy canvas roofing harness around my ribs and pulled the steel carabiner shut with a winch. I couldn't pull a full breath into my lungs. I didn't yell. I didn't sweep my arm across the counter and throw the laptop against the drywall. That's the thing they don't tell you about finding out your whole life is a parasitic joke. You don't explode like they do in the movies. You just freeze. The world dials down to a silent, suffocating vacuum. You get very, very quiet. I clicked on the Document Archive tab again, double-clicking the mouse, just to make absolutely sure I wasn't hallucinating from the severe heat exhaustion I'd been fighting all day. Nope. There it was. Timestamped 4 months ago. The exact week she told me she needed to go to a specialized mindfulness and fertility retreat upstate to prepare her body for the final transfer. A retreat I worked 80 hours of overtime to pay for. She was with him, getting the samples, signing the legal papers, ensuring my name stayed entirely off the genetic chain while my bank account steadily drained into the clinic's billing department. She had essentially hired me to be an unpaid, lifelong contractor for another man's biological legacy. I heard the heavy crunch of gravel in the driveway outside. It was her car. My lungs seized up entirely. I quickly hit download on the donor consent PDF, saved it directly to a hidden, password-protected folder on my desktop, and closed the browser window just as the deadbolt on the front door clicked open. I shoved the laptop away, grabbed my insulated water bottle, and gripped it so hard my knuckles turned completely white. My hands were shaking so badly the ice cubes rattled aggressively against the steel. "Elias? Honey, I'm home." Chloe's voice echoed down the hallway, light and musical. She walked into the kitchen, dropping her expensive pink yoga mat by the pantry door. She had that radiant, pregnant glow everyone talks about. Her cheeks were flushed, and she immediately started complaining about how tired her lower back was from holding downward dog in her prenatal class. She walked right up to my stool, wrapped her soft arms around my dirty, sweat-stained neck, and rested her chin on my shoulder. "How was work, babe? You look so exhausted today," she murmured, pressing a warm kiss to my cheek. She smiled up at me, completely secure in her perfect, fabricated world. She didn't know it, but staring down into her bright eyes, I knew exactly what I had to do next. The loyal, hard-working man she thought she had trapped was already dead. I didn't pull away when she kissed my cheek. I let her soft lips press against the grime, smelling that expensive lavender lotion she always bought using my debit card. I even managed to force a tired, crooked smile. "Yeah, just a long day on the asphalt," I told her, my voice sounding incredibly flat and raspy in my own ears. It didn't even sound like me. It sounded like a stranger wearing my work boots. She hummed, rubbing a manicured hand over her swelling stomach, already walking toward the stainless steel fridge. She poured herself a glass of filtered water, complaining about how her ankles were starting to swell from carrying the extra weight. I just sat there. I watched her. I really watched her. I noticed the relaxed, almost arrogant entitlement in her posture. She wasn't looking at a husband. She was looking at a utility. A guy who could fix the leaking sink, carry the heavy groceries, and quietly deposit thousands of dollars every 2 weeks into the joint checking account, so she could raise Julian's kid in a nice, quiet suburb. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in living like a ghost inside my own house. I woke up at 4:30, just like always. The alarm blared, rattling the cheap composite wood of the nightstand. I sat up, my lower back screaming in protest from the compressed discs I'd earned laying membrane roofs for the last 10 years. Usually, I'd look over at her sleeping, feeling this deep, quiet pride that I was providing for our future baby. This time, I just looked at the back of her head, feeling absolutely nothing but ice water in my veins. The love was gone. It didn't slowly fade. It just vanished, sucked straight out of the room, leaving a cold, sterile vacuum behind. I made the black coffee. I packed my heavy insulated lunch cooler. I drove my beat-up Ford F-250 to the job site, the transmission whining the whole way. I spent 12 hours up on a commercial warehouse roof, the July sun beating down relentlessly, turning the black rubber membrane into a giant frying pan. The heat radiating through the thick rubber soles of my work boots felt like walking on stovetop coils. I was hauling 60-pound rolls of underlayment, my shoulders burning, sweat pouring into my eyes and stinging like hell. Every time I swung my hammer, every time the heavy steel head cracked against a nail, I thought about that PDF file sitting on my hard drive. Julian's signature. Directed donor consent. Bang. The $400 lab fee. Bang. The 55 grand I pulled from my retirement. Bang. I didn't rage. I didn't throw my tools off the edge of the roof. The guys on my crew, guys I've bled and sweat with for years, didn't suspect a damn thing. I just worked. I moved like a machine because if I stopped, if I let the sheer, suffocating gravity of it hit me up there, I knew I'd lose my balance. And I needed my balance. I needed my legs firmly under me for what I had to do next. By lunchtime, the temperature was pushing 95 degrees. The crew crawled down the aluminum ladders to find some miserable patch of shade under the work trucks. I didn't join them. I climbed into the cab of my Ford, rolled the heavy windows up, and cranked the AC. It barely worked, just blowing lukewarm, dusty air into my face. I pulled out my phone. My screen protector was cracked straight down the middle, perfectly splitting my thumbprint. I didn't call a buddy to vent. I didn't call my brother. I opened a private browser tab and searched for the most aggressive, cutthroat family law attorney in the county. Not a mediator. Not some friendly divorce lawyer who focuses on amicable splits. I needed a shark. I needed someone who specialized in fraud, in asset protection, and in destroying ironclad legal traps. I found a firm downtown. High hourly rate. No free consultations. I didn't care. I hit dial. The phone rang twice. A paralegal picked up. My throat was so dry from the roofing dust and the adrenaline that I had to swallow hard twice before I could speak. I need a consultation, I told her, my voice a low, steady gravel. As soon as humanly possible. What is the nature of the case, sir? She asked, her keyboard clicking rapidly on the other end. Paternity fraud, I said. The words tasted like battery acid in my mouth. My wife is in her second trimester. The biological father is her ex-fiancé. achieved through a directed IVF donor process that she forged using my marital funds. I need to know exactly how to legally amputate myself from her and the birth certificate before that kid is born. The clicking stopped completely. The line was dead quiet for 3 long seconds. "Hold, please," she said. I sat there in the sweltering cab of the truck, the smell of hot asphalt and diesel fuel thick in my nose. I watched a drop of sweat run down my wrist, cutting a clean line through the black roofing dirt. My chest was tight, but my head was perfectly clear. I was operating purely on the terrifying, mechanical instinct of survival. When the lawyer finally picked up, his voice was sharp and clinical. We talked for 20 minutes. He told me exactly what documents to secure, what bank accounts to freeze, and what to look for in her email logs. He explained how to establish a secondary drop address for legal mail so nothing would show up at the house. He also told me the most dangerous thing of all. Under state law, if we were married when the baby was born, I was the presumed legal father. I would be trapped, physically and financially tied to Julian's child for 18 years, regardless of DNA. "You have to move fast, Elias," the lawyer warned me, his voice totally devoid of empathy. "And you cannot let her know you're onto her. If she panics and accelerates her timeline, she can bury you in temporary support motions before you file." "She won't know," I promised him, staring out the dirty windshield at the blinding sun. "She thinks I'm too tired to notice." I hung up the phone. I wiped the sweat off my forehead with the back of my forearm, feeling the grit of the fiberglass insulation against my skin. I had my instructions. I had the playbook. I climbed out of the truck and went right back up the ladder to finish my shift. I needed the paycheck. I needed every single dollar I could hoard. That night, I walked back through the front door of my house. The smell of roasted chicken and garlic filled the hallway. Chloe was standing in the kitchen, wearing one of my old, oversized flannel shirts, humming a song on the radio. She turned around, holding a wooden spoon, her eyes bright and happy. "Hey, tough guy," she smiled, walking over to wrap her arms around my waist. "Dinner's almost ready. I missed you today." I looked down at her. I felt the warmth of her body against my chest. I smelled her shampoo, and I didn't flinch. I just wrapped my heavy, calloused hands around her shoulders and pulled her in tight. "Missed you too," I whispered into her hair. She smiled, completely satisfied with my performance. She had absolutely no idea that in 3 days, I was going to systematically dismantle her entire life. That night, after the roasted chicken was put away and Chloe finally drifted off to sleep, the real work started. The house was completely silent, except for the heavy, rhythmic thrum of the central AC unit working overtime against the thick July humidity outside. I laid there in the dark for a full hour, just listening to the steady, even rhythm of her breathing. I stared up at the popcorn ceiling, feeling the dull, throbbing ache in my lower lumbar spine. My body was screaming for sleep, for just 6 hours of unconsciousness before I had to be back on the roof. But my brain was running at 1,000 miles an hour. Cold, clinical, completely detached. When I was absolutely sure she was out, I slid out from under the lightweight summer quilt. The floorboards in our hallway have a specific creak right outside the bathroom door. I knew exactly where to step to avoid it. 10 years of living in this house, paying the mortgage with my cracked hands, meant I knew its bones better than she did. I went straight to my small desk in the spare bedroom, the room she had already started clearing out for the nursery. The room I had just painted a soft sage green while she watched from the doorway. I booted up my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting this harsh, bluish glow across my tired face. I pulled up the secure folder I'd created. Then, I opened our joint bank account portal. I had to follow the money. The lawyer had been explicitly clear on the phone. I needed an undeniable, chronological paper trail proving that my wages funded her biological fraud. I started downloading the PDF statements. January, February, March. My eyes scanned the lines of black text, tracing every single heavy deposit from my roofing company. Thousands of dollars, earned by hauling tar and breathing fiberglass, dropping into the account. And then, the withdrawals. Massive, sweeping outgoing wire transfers directly to the fertility clinic. $5,000 here, $12,000 there. The massive final payment of $18,000 for the VIP extraction and transfer. The same transfer that required Julian's signature on the donor form. I saved every single page. I screenshotted the wire confirmation numbers. I backed it all up to an encrypted cloud drive the lawyer told me to set up. It took hours. My eyes burned, feeling like they were full of sand. My jaw locked tight again, the muscles jumping in my cheek as I watched my life savings get systematically siphoned away for another man's genetic legacy. She didn't just cheat on me. A one-night stand is a mistake. This was a multi-year corporate merger where she hostilely took over my finances to fund her perfect little lie. By 3 in the morning, I had a digital vault of absolute, irrefutable proof. I also opened a new, private checking account at a completely different bank. I drafted an email to my foreman, attaching the new routing number for my direct deposits, scheduling it to send on Friday morning. She wasn't getting another dime of my sweat. I closed the laptop right as the first faint, gray light of dawn started creeping through the window blinds. I felt incredibly hollow, but totally grounded. The grief was entirely gone, replaced by this heavy, terrifying competence. I walked back into the master bedroom. Chloe shifted under the sheets, sighing in her sleep, completely oblivious to the fact that the financial safety net she relied on had just been cut. Wednesday and Thursday were a blur of scorching heat on the roof and suffocating acting at home. I kept my mouth shut. I ate the dinners she cooked. I nodded when she talked about baby names. The asymmetry of the information was a physical weight on my chest, heavier than any bundle of shingles I've ever carried. I knew everything. She knew nothing. Thursday night, she walked into the kitchen while I was washing the grease off my hands at the sink. She wrapped her arms around my waist from behind, resting her cheek against my shoulder blade. "Hey, honey," she said softly, her voice full of that fake, domestic warmth. "I want to do something special tomorrow night. A second trimester celebratory dinner. Just the two of us. I'll make the prime rib you love. How does that sound?" I gripped the edge of the stainless steel sink. The cold metal pressed hard into my calloused palms. I looked out the window into the dark, sweltering summer night. "That sounds perfect, Chloe," I said, keeping my voice dead level. "I'll be home right at 6. I wouldn't miss Friday night for the world." She squeezed me tighter, humming a happy little tune. She had absolutely no idea what I was bringing home to the table. Friday morning hit like a hammer. The sun was already baking the asphalt when my boots hit the roof at 6 a.m. I mean, you know that kind of heat? The kind that just radiates right up through the rubber soles of your boots and makes the air shimmer above the black membrane. I was laying down the last section of underlayment, my knees absolutely grinding into the grit, the sweat stinging my eyes so bad I had to keep blinking just to see the chalk lines. But I didn't care about the heat today. I was entirely numb to it. My mind was already off that roof. It was down in the city, sitting on a massive oak desk in a high-rise law firm. Every time my foreman yelled over the roar of the generators, checking our pace, I just nodded. I kept my head down. My chest felt like someone had poured wet concrete into my lungs and let it set. The duality of it all was making me physically sick. I was earning my hourly wage, bleeding for a family that didn't exist, while the woman I married was probably at home, online shopping for a bassinet using the credit card I paid off every month. It's a terrifying thing, man. Realizing the person you sleep next to is practically a stranger. Worse than a stranger. An architect of your ruin. I just kept thinking about Julian. The guy wore custom suits and worked in an air-conditioned high-rise. He never had asphalt under his fingernails. And yet, I was the one out here baking in the July sun to pay the doctors who engineered his kid. My back teeth locked together so hard I heard a popping sound in my jaw. By 2 in the afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. The nausea wasn't just physical. It was a deep, psychological disgust twisting in my gut. I told the foreman I felt sick, heat exhaustion, dizzy spells. He took one look at my pale, drawn face and told me to get off the roof before I fell off. I climbed down the aluminum ladder, my hands shaking so violently the metal rungs rattled against the side of the building. I threw my heavy tool belt into the bed of my truck. It hit the rusted steel with a loud, final crash. I wasn't coming back on Monday. At least, not as the same man. I drove straight to a gas station off the interstate. I went into that filthy bathroom, turned the cracked sink handle, and just scrubbed. I used cheap, pink industrial soap to grind the black tar out from under my fingernails. The water was freezing, but I kept splashing it over my neck, trying to wash away the feeling of being completely used. I stared at myself in that scratched, graffiti-covered mirror. I looked older. The lines around my eyes were dug in deep, filled with gray dust. But the guy looking back at me wasn't a victim. He was awake. He was finally awake, and he was dangerous in a way she couldn't possibly understand. I got back in my truck and drove downtown. The lawyer's office was freezing cold, all glass walls and polished gray floors. I walked in wearing my dusty work boots and faded jeans, sticking out like a sore thumb. I didn't care. The receptionist handed me a thick, heavy manila folder. I could feel the physical weight of it in my hands. The paper felt rough against my calloused thumbs. Inside were the finalized divorce filings, the emergency financial freeze notices, and the brutal, undeniable petition to disestablish paternity based on medical fraud. It was a tactical nuke, printed in black and white on standard legal paper. I slid it into the front seat of my truck. I drove home with the windows rolled down, the hot July wind whipping through the cab, feeling my heart slam against my ribs the whole way. The engine whined as I hit the gas, pushing closer and closer to the end. When I pulled into our driveway, I just sat there for a minute. The engine ticked as it cooled down in the sweltering heat. The house looked exactly the same as it did the day we bought it. The lawn I mowed on Sundays. The front porch light she always left on for me, so I wouldn't trip on the stairs. It was a perfect little suburban lie. A movie set she had built just to keep me docile and paying the bills. I grabbed the folder, tucked it firmly under my arm, and walked up the concrete path. My boots felt like they weighed 50 pounds each. I opened the front door, and the smell of roasting prime rib and garlic butter instantly hit me. It was rich, thick, and domestic. The kind of smell that's supposed to mean you're home, you're safe. Chloe was standing at the kitchen island. She was wearing a nice dark red dress, her hair curled, pouring a glass of sparkling cider for herself and a cold beer for me. She had set the dining room table with the good plates, the ones we got for our wedding. The silver forks were perfectly aligned. "Hey, you're early," she smiled, her eyes lighting up with that manufactured warmth. She walked over, putting her soft hands on my chest, looking up at me with this sickeningly sweet expression. "I timed the roast perfectly. Go wash up, babe. Tonight is all about us. All about our little family. I even made those scalloped potatoes you love." I looked down at her. I didn't flinch. I didn't pull away. I just stared straight into those familiar brown eyes, feeling absolutely nothing but the cold, heavy folder pressed against my ribs under my jacket. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator behind her. "I'll be right out," I told her, my voice perfectly steady, sounding like a machine. I walked to the bathroom, washed the last of the grit off my hands, and brought the manila folder out to the dining room. I set it face down on the empty chair beside me. She pulled the prime rib out of the oven, the meat sizzling violently in the pan, completely unaware that the countdown clock had just hit 0. I sat there at the head of the oak table. I mean, you'd think my hands would be shaking. You really would. Sitting there across from the woman who just robbed me of my future, eating the dinner she bought with my sweat. But my hands were perfectly still. I gripped the heavy silver fork, the cool metal pressing into the thick calluses on my palm, and I just cut another piece of the prime rib. It was perfectly cooked, pink in the middle, dripping with hot au jus. I put it in my mouth and chewed. It tasted like absolutely nothing, just wet sand. But I swallowed it anyway. Chloe was talking. God, she was just talking so much. Her voice was this light, musical hum floating over the dining room table. She was telling me about this imported mahogany crib she saw online. $1,000 crib. She was dragging a piece of bread through the garlic butter on her plate, laughing about how the baby was kicking her ribs. I just kept chewing my food. My jaw muscles were locking up so tight that a dull, throbbing headache was starting to pulse right behind my temples. The central air conditioning kicked on, blowing a stream of freezing air over the back of my neck. But inside my chest, it was just this cold, airless void. And I was thinking, "Elias," she smiled, reaching her hand across the polished wood to gently touch my knuckles. Her skin was so soft. "We should start interviewing pediatricians next month. I want to make sure we find someone in the premium network. You know, just to be safe." I looked down at her hand resting on mine. I didn't pull away. I just stared at her manicured nails. My throat felt thick, like I had swallowed a handful of dry fiberglass insulation. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the cold, conditioned air into my lungs. "Yeah," I said, my voice coming out as a low, flat rasp. "We'll figure all that out." I took the last bite of my meal. I chewed it. I swallowed. Then, I set my fork and knife down on the white porcelain plate. They made a sharp, metallic clink that echoed in the quiet room. I picked up my cloth napkin, wiped the grease off my mouth, and neatly folded it next to my glass of ice water. The condensation from the glass was pooling on the wood, dripping slowly down the side. Chloe stopped talking. The smile slowly slid off her face. She tilted her head, looking at me with this sudden, nervous confusion. "Babe, are you okay? You're being really quiet." I didn't answer her. I reached over to the empty chair beside me. My fingers closed over the thick edge of the manila folder. I picked it up. It felt incredibly heavy, like holding a cinder block. I didn't throw it at her. I didn't slam my fist on the table. I just laid it flat on the polished oak and slowly slid it across the wood. It made a dry, scratching sound, sliding past the salt shaker and stopping right in front of her dinner plate. "What's this?" she asked. She let out a tiny, breathless laugh, but her eyes were darting nervously between my face and the thick envelope. "Open it," I told her. Just 2 words. "Flat. Empty." She hesitated for a second. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped back the metal clasp and opened the flap. She pulled the thick stack of papers out. The very first page was the directed donor consent form. Julian's name, printed in bold black ink right at the top. His signature at the bottom. The second page was the stamped bank ledger, highlighting the massive wire transfer from my hard-earned roofing wages directly to the fertility clinic's billing department. The third page was the filed legal petition to disestablish paternity due to medical fraud, completely severing my name from the unborn child. I watched the color completely vanish from her face. I mean, it was instantaneous. 1 second she had that radiant, rosy flush, and the next second her skin turned the color of wet cement. Her eyes went incredibly wide, scanning the medical codes, the clinic timestamps, the financial logs. Her mouth opened, hanging slack, but no sound came out. She looked like she had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. "Elias." "Elias, wait, this isn't." She finally stammered, her voice cracking into a high, desperate whisper. She dropped the papers. Her hands were violently shaking now, rattling the silverware on the table. "You don't understand. Let me explain, please." "There is absolutely nothing left to explain, Chloe," I said. My voice was ice cold. There was no anger left. No tears. Just the terrifying, mechanical calm of a man who had already buried the marriage days ago. I stood up. The heavy wooden legs of my dining chair screeched harshly against the hardwood floor. I looked down at her sitting there in the ruin of her perfect, parasitic plan. "The joint accounts are completely frozen," I told her, my tone purely factual, like I was reading a weather report. "My direct deposits are gone. The lawyer has already filed the paperwork with the state." I turned my back on her and started walking toward the front hallway. I could hear her gasping for air, the chair scraping as she scrambled to get up, her footsteps slapping frantically against the floorboards behind me. "Call Julian tonight." I called back over my shoulder, grabbing my truck keys off the hook by the door. "Because he's on the hook for the delivery bills now. Not me." I opened the front door and stepped out into the heavy July heat. I could hear her behind me, sobbing, her bare feet slapping frantically against the hardwood floor. "Elias, please, you can't just leave. Elias." I didn't turn around. I didn't break my stride. I just gripped the brass handle and pulled the heavy door shut behind me, the deadbolt rattling loudly in the frame. Click. The silence that followed was immediate, man. It was like stepping out of a pressurized cabin into a vacuum. The hot night air hit my face, smelling like cut grass and cooling asphalt. I walked down the concrete path, my work boots crunching loudly on the loose gravel of the driveway. I climbed up into the cab of my F-250. The cracked leather seat was still radiating heat from the afternoon sun. I jammed the brass key into the ignition, and the engine roared to life, a deep rumble that vibrated right up through the rusted floorboards into my exhausted knees. I threw the shifter into reverse and backed out into the street. I didn't look up at the house. I didn't look at the warm porch light she always left on for me. I just shifted into drive, pressed my boot down on the gas pedal, and drove away from the life I spent 6 years building. About 2 miles down the dark county road, my phone lit up the inside of the cab. It buzzed aggressively against the hard plastic of the center console. The harsh white screen glared in the dark. "Chloe Mobile." Calling. Then a text message. Asterisk, Elias, you can't do this, I'm pregnant. We can fix this. Asterisk, then another incoming call. I kept my calloused hands clamped firmly on the steering wheel, staring straight ahead at the headlights cutting through the dark. My chest felt incredibly light. It was this bizarre, hollow feeling. For the first time in 6 years, I wasn't carrying the crushing weight of her expectations. I reached over, swiped the screen, and toggled the phone to do not disturb. The cab instantly went pitch black again, lit only by the passing orange glow of the streetlights. The lawyer executed the rest of the extraction like a cold surgeon. The next few weeks were an absolute bloodbath for her. Because she didn't just lose my paycheck. Man, she lost her entire cover story. Without my direct deposits paying the 30-year mortgage and the grocery bills, the illusion she built collapsed in days. She had to pack up her expensive maternity clothes, empty out that nursery, and move out of the house we were supposed to raise our family in. And you know what the best part was? The absolute, poetic justice of it all. She had to make that humiliating phone call to Julian. She had to dial his number and explain to her pristine, corporate ex-fiancé that her brilliant little plan to use a blue-collar commercial roofer as an unpaid ATM had completely imploded. Julian was suddenly stripped of his anonymous safety net. He was legally exposed, staring straight down the barrel of 18 years of court-ordered child support, tied to the medical fraud they signed off on. My lawyer made absolutely sure the clinic's billing department forwarded the massive remaining balance for the delivery straight to his luxury downtown condo. I didn't pay another single dime. I'm 38 years old now. I'm sitting here tonight in a cramped, rented apartment, drinking a cheap domestic beer, looking at a mattress on the floor and a couple of taped-up cardboard boxes. My savings account is gutted. The 401k is completely gone. I spent a decade of my life sweating on black tar roofs, breathing in toxic sealant, for a future that was nothing but a carefully orchestrated mirage. I sacrificed my physical body for a ghost. My lower back still grinds with a sickening pop every single morning when I bend over to tie my work boots. The black tar stains are still permanently worked deep into the calluses of my hands. But you know what? When I wake up tomorrow at 4:30, when that cheap digital alarm clock goes off and the room is freezing cold and totally quiet, I'll be waking up as a free man. I won't be quietly funding another man's genetic legacy. I won't be living in the suffocating shadow of a lie. I walked out of that house with the only two things that actually matter in this gritty life: my dignity and the absolute, unvarnished truth.